first-round matchups for tomorrow and kind of set the stage. But I want to do it from a different standpoint. For example, we'll start with at the top there with Marshall and Southern Miss in the 8-9 game. But I don't want the Jasons talking about it.
Sure.
I want to get Malcolm's take and Brett's take, and I'll jump in as well in terms of maybe the keys that you see having seen both of these teams in action. What's it going to take? How do you see it shaken out between the Herd and the Lady Eagles?
I think the first player that comes to mind is Taylor Pearson of Marshall, because she's been really impressive, I think, as the season's gone on with the way that she's impacted the game, the way that she can step out and hit shots. She can always get there and rebound, and she's going to be somebody that Marshall needs to step up against the pressure that Southern Miss is going to provide, because we all know what kind of a rebounding team that Southern Miss is, and they can kind of flip a game in their favor when they do that, going back to our point of how big rebounding is going to be in this venue. But then at the same time, Marshall with their three-point shots, if they get hot, then I think it's going to be very tough for Southern Miss to match that. So this is one of the almost the epitome games of who's going to dictate how the game's going to get played, and I think that team has the edge.
But Marshall, like UAB, very underrated defensively.
No doubt.
The numbers show that too. It's like you don't, when you think of Marshall, you think, ability, like you said, Jason, ability to shoot the ball from deep, but they can keep teams in check to the point where that three-point shot that they can get it going with a couple in a row. They're deadly.
Well, and this is one of those where if Vegas was doing lines on women's basketball, there might not be one, because you don't know about Shantae Hales, and I think she's the key. I mean, if she's at 80%, compared to 30%, it's a huge difference, and I haven't seen her play these last two games. Obviously, she's only scored 3 in both games, but when she's healthy, she's as good as there is in the league and taking a game over down the stretch from the point guard position. So that one's going to be interesting just because you don't know. If she's not healthy, I'd lean towards Marshall. If she's at 80% or so, I mean, I think that Southern Miss has got a good chance.
I'm not really so much accounting for Hales because they've had to go the last month and change without her. I mean, if anything that she can provide to Southern Miss is a benefit for the Lady Eagles, I mean, that you can only really go up from that point. You have somebody who's just been so consistent for them this year in Respect Leapart. I think she's really carried that team on her back. I think you also look at a couple of players that are a bit of wild cards. You mentioned Jason talked about Allery Mays. I think also you look at somebody like Kelsey Jones down low. She has the ability to get things going as well. And there's a few others. There's not a very deep team in Southern Miss this year, but you always have to respect their ability off made baskets to be able to come after you defensively. And in a tournament setting, will Marshall be able to value the basketball with that in mind?
And respect Leapart, by the way, as we bring up respect to somebody that has really impressed me both times that I've seen her play in 2 years, second team all-conference, and who's basically taken, to correct me if I'm wrong here, but with Shantae Hales out, Leapart's become the go-to player.
Yeah, she had no choice, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was either going to be her, or it was going to be a long month of February, on the way, out of Norfolk that night when Shantae got hurt. And Leapart's one that was shocking to me to see her nominated second team all-conference. I was so happy for her. She's such a great South Florida kid. If you know anything about South Florida kids, they're just so calm, and that's her. And to see that rewarded, but I think it spoke to people around this league were watching and paying attention when Hales went down, what would happen with Southern Miss, and for us to kind of keep our head above water, so to speak, and tread water to get ourselves into this 9-seeded position without 17 points a game. I think it spoke to respect.
Well, in Southern Miss, you mentioned, is not overly deep, and that's where I think the whole Hales situation. I know they've been playing without her for basically a month now, but if she can come back and score 10 or 12 points, that could be huge in a game like this.
All right, so that's Marshall and Southern Miss, the 8 versus 9 game. The winner gets Rice on Thursday at the same bat time, same bat channel. Court B is what they're going to be on. Court A, coming up a half hour after that, is the 5 versus 12 matchup. You've got UAB, who won a couple of games, and again, as Jason Baker mentioned earlier, convincingly over Southern Miss in the final in Birmingham after getting a Leah Kirstein three-pointer with 0.4 of a second to go in overtime at Old Dominion, killing their 16-game home court winning streak. They are in action, and pardon my mistake there on the graphic. They're on Court A at 11:30 a.m. Central as the 5 seed, as the Blazers take on the 12 seed Louisiana Tech. So, Malcolm, you are
I'll be quiet.
You were abstained from this vote. Guys, how do you all see this one shaking out?
Well, again, we talk about, three-point shooting in this building. But man, it feels like if there's anybody who can overcome that, it's UAB.
There's no
Certainly
doubt.
with their ability, even without Kuzmanic, obviously they've Childress has such great output there, and Barnes makes it all go offensively. I think Louisiana Tech. I know when Marshall went down there played Louisiana Tech, we didn't see Amber Dixon. Amber Dixon did not play in that game against the Thundering Herd, so it'll be interesting to see. Again,
she's been good for them lately.
She's been good for them lately, and so it'll be our first chance to see. Maybe if I get a chance to come over after the game, after the Thundering Herd's game's over a little bit, see how that goes. But again, I think it'll be again. Just to come back, clash of styles a little bit, obviously, just to see how that goes. I think, if you could ask both teams in that game, where would you like the game to be? I'm going to say UAB probably wants that game to be played in the 70s, maybe Louisiana Tech less so, but we'll see how that goes.
And Tech had its way in terms of that scoring output the first time those two teams got together. The problem was I think points were a little bit at a scarcity for the Lady Techsters as that one went further along, and the Blazers were able to keep them at bay in Ruston.
Well, and I'll say this. We were speaking of underrated players and maybe players hidden like Angela Vendrell. What about Grayson Bright? I mean, she really makes them tick, and Bright is just such a competitor. I don't know her. I've never spoken a word to her, but she just has this look about her like, I'm not here to play games. We're not here to shake hands. I'm here to win a basketball game. And to me, players like that in conference tournaments like this can be players that all of a sudden you look up and look. I know in the big tournament, everybody's favorite is to pick a 12 beating a 5. That isn't always the case in a conference tournament. But I will say this. If it occurs in this place tomorrow, I will not be shocked. I think I'll pause for a moment and kind of be like, wow, like UAB bowed out of this thing. But I don't know that it would shock me because Dixon, I can attest in person, is as good as advertised. Bright's is good. And the one thing about them, and I think it speaks to them over the last couple of weeks, they play as hard as anybody in this league, and they're going to do it for 40 minutes. And they can get into you, too, defensively as well, up and down the court, and really pressure you. So, UAB is playing well, and they're motivated. You don't have an all-time type player when you start referring to Rachel Childress and that sort of thing without recognizing what type of player she truly is for this league. And, it's just going to be – it's going to be fun. That's one of the fun matchups tomorrow because, like, if they look like they look on Saturday, Katie bar the door, they may be playing on Saturday for UAB. But with as hot as Louisiana Tech is and with some players like Bright, Dixon, Gento as well, I mean –
Annalar Robertson's playing
Annalar
well right now down low.
Speaking of freshmen, right? Yeah.
She and Robertson had a gigantic game against us. But again, and something I think Malcolm tweeted or social media the other day, and like Doug said, the 11 and 12 seeds are playing so strong right now going into this tournament. I mean, Louisiana Tech, a couple bounces here and there. You're talking about a team that would have won 7 consecutive games for a 12 seed.
Well, and they're a one-possession game on Saturday in Bowling Green, Kentucky. I mean, we know how – we just talked about how tough that is. That tells you – I mean, they had all the reason on Saturday. Because you're on the road, right, on Thursday, right, Malcolm?
Yep.
I mean, you're talking about back-to-back road games because of the bonus play. They had all the reason to say, you know what, we're going to coast this one into the Star on Saturday. But instead, we're looking up because it mattered. If they would have won, we would have been the 8. FAU would have been the 9 had they won that basketball game. So I'm watching from Bartow, paying attention to their score, and like, they're playing this hard against the 3 seed essentially in this Conference USA tournament.
Yeah, I totally agree with your analysis, by the way, on Grayson Bright. To me, she's the X factor. She gets going. She has herself a game that could be the difference maker against a UAB squad that, again, I think you can't discount the impact that losing Caitlin Thomas, albeit 2 months ago, has had on that team because now the emphasis is a lot more so on that outside four to produce and make it happen, which is okay when you're taking on a team that might not value guarding the entirety of that half court as much. But you play somebody like La Tech where you might have a little difficulty at times getting your business done. That could be a tough day, especially if the shots aren't falling.
No doubt.
Yeah, no, I guess I agree with everything that's been said. I wanted to bring up Annalore Robertson just because I thought she was very impressive last week, and without Caitlin Thomas, that certainly hurts what La Tech, or hurts rather what UAB is able to do inside. But yeah, Grayson Bright's just an ultra competitor, and she can score on all three levels, so she'll be fun to watch.
So again, that's UAB, Louisiana Tech. The winner of the 5 versus 12 matchup is going to draw Middle Tennessee. And Malcolm, did we get that just about all the way right here for that matchup?
You did.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, y'all are spot on. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we're going to have to play well on both sides of the floor to beat UAB. I mean, you're not going to just play well on one side of the floor. You can't just play good defense and not score and think you're going to beat UAB or vice versa. So we're going to have to click on all cylinders. I mean, Annalore Robertson has come on big for us. Grayson Bright is kind of the X factor for us. We're going to have to be able to knock down outside shots. I mean, when we have won big games this year, Middle Tennessee, UTEP, so forth and so on, it's been because we've hit outside shots. It's why we almost beat Western Kentucky on Saturday. So if you look at the end of the day and we're 4 of 20 from the three-point line, I don't like our chances.
And let me say this, Doug. This speaks to the league, and this speaks to them as the 12. He just reeled off those wins they have. We as the 9 seed don't have as quality of wins when you look at it up above in the seedings as what Louisiana Tech has. Southern Miss has done a really good job of beating the quote-unquote teams down below them. And they've done a really good job of sneaking up and beating some teams, like a UTEP. I mean, they've jumped out there and beaten teams. That's how dangerous they are as a 12 seed.
But we're one possession away from having wins over 3 of the top 4 seeds. Right. The only one not is Old Dominion, who owned us at their place. But, yeah, I mean, we're that close and beat Middle Tennessee by 18. So
there you go. UAB, Louisiana Tech. The winner draws Middle Tennessee on Thursday. That will be an interesting one in its own right, regardless of who ends up making it to that next round. All right, down the bracket we go, the 7 versus 10 matchup. You've got UTEP coming in, the number 7 seed, taking on Florida Atlantic, the number 10 seed. You've got 2 teams that love to press, not necessarily religiously, but they are pretty good at it at times. They're both young. They're both hungry. They're both, I wouldn't necessarily say they're playing their best ball, although FAU got a nice win against Marshall to close out the regular season the other day. I don't think we have anybody representing here.
No.
Steve Kaplowitz saw the bat signal. He hasn't dropped by here just yet, but let's go ahead and talk about it.
The one thing I think that jumps out to me is, this was a 31-point game back in January. This was a game where UTEP, had its way with Florida Atlantic. So, again, you're talking about a rematch scenario. And, by the way, there were 64 free throws taken in that game. I just pulled up the box score right here,
how do you know all that? I'm impressed.
I pulled up the box score
where are you
right
getting
here.
That from?
But because
Jason
I was trying to
embraced the Google
machine. I was trying to think up, because, by the way, that was the second game of the season, second conference game of the season. So that was the opening weekend. So, again, you're talking about that matchup. So, from Florida Atlantic standpoint, how different are those 2 teams now 2 months later? We'll see.
Difference.
All right.
Sure.
And so, but again, if you're FAU, you got to be like, ladies, we got to have something better than 31 points right
We
here.
beat Charlotte by 37 at our place last year in the only meeting between the 2 teams, and came here and they beat us by 9.
Right,
so
right.
you just don't ever know.
Really
yeah.
You don't. Really.
And I'm telling you guys, on January, I think we played them on January the 12th. I would have told you UTEP was going to be a top 3 team in this league.
I would agree with that.
Not just off the score, but just off of the eye test, off of what I watched.
Yeah.
When they left Hattiesburg, if I could have called Malcolm and said, buddy, you better buckle up your chin strap.
I watched that game.
Because they're
we
coming
had the day
rusted.
off.
Oh, my goodness. It was – and look, if you forced me to take somebody from 5 to 8 to win this thing on Saturday, if you'll tell me Katia Gallegos would play well – I'll take that one right there, and you can have the rest of them. That's what kind of 7 seed they are because, look, Zetz isn't afraid of a single shot on that floor. She has got ice water running through her veins. Gallegos has proven as a freshman she can do some dynamic things. She can score, get up and down the floor. They've got some role players. Ariana Gill, you mentioned her a moment ago. She can go for 20 and 10 in a New York second. So they're dangerous. And then that's not to mention – Florida Atlantic has a SEC transfer in Crystal Prim from Auburn who can take over a game. She almost beat us on the Florida swing this year, she scored 20 points in the fourth quarter against us to will her team back into that ball game.
She had a monster game against Charlotte, and they crushed them in Boca Raton this year. So that Florida Atlantic team, I'll tell you what, they might be circling the wagons there with Jim Jaber. They're figuring things out.
I think Florida Atlantic would – I mean, we've been talking about them within the WKU program all year as this team's going to upset somebody in Frisco.
Yeah.
And I think the only reason I'm picking them not to do so is just because of their injuries right now. It's an unfortunate situation. If they had Lota Vecaaho right now, that might be a very different story because you talk about a great freshman point guard showdown between her and Gallegos. That'd be must-watch TV right there. But FAU, I mean – credit to them for everything that they've done and what they will do. Again, only losing Prim, they're going to bring back everybody. I go back to what I said earlier about UTEP starting strong. I'm not so much worried about it in this game, but if UTEP gets through FAU, then they can knock out anybody if they start strong. Because if they get behind against one of the better teams, they're going to find it hard going. But with all the players we've talked about, also Sabine Lipe has been really big for them this year. With her shooting, with her defense, she's somebody that's, I think, played a lot more minutes than maybe a lot of people were thinking that she would. UTEP has everything there, and I think Kevin Baker is one of the underrated coaches in this conference, quite honestly.
Yes, totally agree with you on that. Another freshman that's stepping up in recent games is Klepkova with UTEP. Yeah, she's starting to come around as well. I think she had a pretty good game against
She had
Southern
15
Miss.
against us a couple of Saturdays ago.
And so they're playing a similar team in Florida Atlantic here.
They are.
You know, in terms of the approach. So that is a really interesting game. I'll give a quick question before we move on. Actually, a couple of them here with regard to this before we get to the last one here in this first round. Over/under number of possessions. I'll set it at 80. How many possessions in this contest?
Over.
Yeah, I would go over.
They're going to press each other. They're going to press each other from the tip until their tongues are dragging on the fourth.
That may be the one.
Can't worry about tomorrow. You got to win today.
That's it.
Right. Like I said, typically coaches condense the number of possessions in the postseason. That might be the exception.
No,
this
I
game
agree.
right here might be the exception.
But here's the thing. You're right. You don't want to play for tomorrow because if you do that, you more often than not, you end up finding yourself sitting on the curb the next morning.
That's right.
Waiting
Waiting
go
on
home.
the bus, yeah.
Yes. But that said, you turn around, you take on the 2 seed at Old Dominion. And while from a possession, a game standpoint, they're one of the more patient teams in the conference, that's just because everybody kind of schemes them up to be able to slow down the Monarchs. They want them to go deep into the shot clock and try to force them into a late possession shot. That's just been the trek, having seen that in the chair all year long. That's a team that wants to go quick. And so if UTEP and FAU, whoever gets through that, how do they approach that next round when they take on the Monarchs, the 2 seed, who are playing their first game at that point?
Yeah, you almost have to beat them at their own game, I feel like. And UTEP, I believe, is certainly more capable of doing that with the pieces that they have in place right now and just the overall infrastructure of it. And, again, I don't mean to take anything away from FAU. I'm just seriously concerned about their lack of depth right now and some of the pieces that they're missing. But, yeah, I feel like because I don't believe – and, again, and this is nothing I think Kevin Baker's a phenomenal coach, but I don't see him changing the entire minor style just to counteract what the Monarchs are trying to do. So if that ends up being the matchup, I think – UTEP's just going to have to out-execute ODU, and that was a pretty close game in El Paso, wasn't it?
It was. It was 40s at halftime, and I know it was a single-digit final. I want to say it was like 8 or 9, but it wasn't until the end where Old Dominion finally started to get a little distance.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think, look, I think it can be said across this league, if you've got a player like a Gallegos, like a Zetz, like a Prim, like all these teams have, even an Amber Dixon, Savannah Wheeler, when you get past that first one, you just got to stick with what got you there, and you roll that basketball out and say, look, we got to figure out that ours are better than yours for 40 minutes, and at the end of this, we'll figure out who's got the most points at the end, because essentially the way this works is you only need one more point to keep seeing tomorrow and then the next guy. And so I think, he'll roll Gallegos out there and say, hey, keep it the same speed you've kept it all year, kid, and let's figure it out from here. The good news is he gets her for 3 more years after this.
That's right. And I think her biggest benefit is not only her ability to handle the basketball. She's very steady handling the point for UTEP. But to me, the bigger thing for her is confidence. When she is looking confident out there and almost cocky, that's when I think the Miners shine. You've got to keep her in that mindset. You got to keep her thinking, hey, she's playing in front of her town crowd in El Paso, every time she's stepping on the floor here in Frisco. Because if they do that, they could be a really tough out.
And she speaks to their area. I don't know if y'all know her story, but Mark Brunner, their SID, told me, she was born in Juarez. She's from Juarez, actually, and got to play on the Mexican national team. And she brings that kind of grit that you would kind of expect from over there kind of to the minors. And I think that was something they needed because Zetz doesn't have that. Klopkova really doesn't have that. Lipe really doesn't have that. Neither does Gil. But Gallegos kind of brings that, for lack of a better term, a swagger. And if she'll bring it for a couple of days in this tournament, they could be a nightmare for a couple of teams.
So there you go. That is a 1:30 Central approximate tip on Court A, the 7 versus 10. That's UTEP and Florida Atlantic. Finally, we got the 6 versus 11. By the way, that UTEP-FAU matchup, winner gets Old Dominion, who's the 2 seed. 6 versus 11. Wow. Charlotte, the 6. North Texas, the 11.
Yeah, and this is a game, again, took place 3 weeks ago in Charlotte. Charlotte won 72-59. And again, I think what we're talking about depth, Doug, you brought it up. Charlotte played 13 players in that game. North Texas just 8. And Nia Boyd and Anisha George had 45 of their 59 points. So and had a tough shoot. For the rest of the lineup, kind of had a tough shooting day a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see if they can kind of match some of that output there, and can they do it with a reduced rotation? Of course, Middleton for Charlotte, that's another player that a big player inside that really we saw her first game out there. She's added something to the 49ers post play down there. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do. It's again it's a situation where I think that North Texas is going to have to. They've been playing well, but I think they're going to have to take it up a notch against Charlotte.
I'm going to be surprised if North Texas wins this game. I really like Charlotte. And, again, we only saw both teams one time this year. We lost at both of their places, lost at North Texas in overtime. But I just think Charlotte has got all the pieces. They're good defensively. They've got different players who can score. And I could be completely wrong. North Texas is in their backyard, basically, so they'll have, I would think, good support here. But, I just think Charlotte is a team that, again, it wouldn't surprise me to see them go a couple of rounds.
Yep. But here you have, North Texas has taken on a team in Charlotte, very similar defensive characteristic to an Old Dominion or a Rice, although it's more from a zone standpoint than how Old Dominion and Rice will play. Typically they'll try to man you up. So you take that into account, the fact that Charlotte really covers the floor well with that zone. North Texas played those two top teams pretty doggone tough here in recent weeks. They seem like they're figuring it out, and they seem like they're getting more confident offensively.
Yeah, and I think the two things to watch for me, first of all, the problem with Charlotte is even though they've got players who can score, they tend not to score a whole lot, and it comes down to how the game gets played. If they can keep it to if you will, a Rice or ODU type score, high 50s, low 60s or something, you give them the edge. But it's tough for them to score with teams. That's just not how they're built to do. It's kind of the Virginia style. Obviously, that pack line that they play, it trickles down men's and women's side on Charlotte. So that's, if North Texas does what they did against us way back on January 2nd when Randy Thompson's banking in threes off the upper corner of the backboard and who knows what else is going on and they're feeding off the home crowd, you have to watch that. But the other piece about confidence, North Texas is coming in hot. They're feeling good about themselves. As you mentioned earlier, Doug, Charlotte blows that lead against Middle Tennessee when they had a bye up for grabs. And so now all of a sudden they face the drastic task of 4-4, and are they mentally dialed in to come in here essentially on the road and get it done?
And that's a great point, by the way. That's something that I don't think I didn't realize that, to be honest with you, is in terms of just how what that game meant for Charlotte, certainly, because that's not an insignificant factor there going psychologically, right?
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Now you're playing on Wednesday versus Thursday.
Physically is one thing, but psychologically, you're talking about 18 to 22-year-olds. Are they going to be able to overcome that?
Well, and to expand on that, talking about Charlotte, that's not the only collapse they've had this year. They had an 8-point lead at Old Dominion with 4 minutes to go and didn't score a point after that. Monarchs put 11 on the board straight, came back and won by 3. And there's been other instances like that. They got taken behind the woodshed in non-conference at home by Fordham by 25 points in December. They've got crushed as well at Middle Tennessee after winning at UAB early in league play. So this is a team that seems like when they do face some adversity, They don't particularly handle it very well. So now you're in a real pressure cooker situation. How will they handle that first bout of adversity could really sow the fate of the 49ers here in Frisco this year.
And it goes back to what I said at the very beginning is it's the teams who still want to be playing. And in all honesty, we don't know what Charlotte's going on inside or North Texas or any of these teams. I mean, Charlotte might, they just might be in a bad place and they're ready for the season to end. So without having somebody here who, a Travis who knows what's going on with Charlotte, it's hard for us to tell. So we can sit here and we can look at it from
they're
what
shooting
they
around
do.
right now.
But there's just so much more to the game than X's and O's.
Well, and I'll say this about Charlotte. They remind me the most of you guys, of ODU. They don't really have one player that you can just point out and say, hey, we got to go stop her because she's going to be a nightmare for us. What they got is about 7 of them, and you got to figure out which 5 are going to be hot for them that you got to try to figure out a way to slow down. I mean, even like Christian Height, she didn't play in the ball game against us the first matchup. She played in the second matchup back in Hattiesburg, and she was a difference maker.
Yeah.
And it kind of taught me, like, man, they're a team that when they've got all their pieces together, they could be as scary as anybody in this league.
Mariah Lenny can hit some big shots for them, too.
Boy.
I mean, I know we talk a lot about Phillips and her ability to take over the game for Charlotte, but, Lenny can shoot the ball pretty well, too. And Nia Boyd, we mentioned her earlier, another one of those talented freshmen. She seems to get more and more confident the more she plays with the mean green.
And again, not a tremendous shooter, but you know what? She came in our building and made 6 threes. You know,
There you go.
So something like that can happen this week, guys. It's just
North Texas, to me, they're going to have to find a way to turn over Charlotte early. They're going to have to get them turnovers in bunches, especially, off makes, off free throws. I think the other big key for them is they've got to get it to the breadwinner early on, Anisha George.
Yeah.
She's got to find a way to get the interior in foul trouble. Dara Pearson, and then going into the bench there with Jasmine Harris. If that happens, then I think you could see North Texas put themselves in position to win this game.
She could give Charlotte, but George could give Charlotte problems.
Yes.
She could cause Charlotte to have to do some things defensively that they're really not comfortable doing. And the key for George, she fouled out against the game. The only time we played them earlier this year, we beat North Texas in the Super Pit, and George was basically a non-factor in the second half due to fouls. If she can keep herself on the court tomorrow, you're right, Doug. She could be the difference maker for them, for North Texas to stay in that game late.
Which big man, big woman, gets the other one in foul trouble? I mean,
doubt,
if
I
you get
doubt.
George in foul trouble, then North Texas is a completely different team. If she can get the Charlotte post players in foul trouble, then you got to get
And before they suffered some injuries, North Texas early in conference play, they could stomach that.
Yes. Yep.
I don't think they really can stomach that as much
not
anymore,
now.
although Townley's been better for them off the bench.
And Charlene Shepard,
Shepard.
Exactly. We voted, 6th player of the year for us, and she had a great game against us. That's another player again that I think that's really added a lot to their lineup as well.
She's a player that can she pulled down 23 against y'all.
Yeah,
somebody
did.
she pulled 23
She did.
rebounds down against, but she's a player that she can do that and she can disappear, and and so it's just which one shows up, right?
All right, so I mentioned over-under on possessions with UTEP and Florida Atlantic. I got to do it here. Over-under 65. What do you all see?
That's a pretty good number.
Doug, I think you have a future as a bookmaker here, Doug.
Yeah.
Are you going to Vegas
I'm
on the
terrible
flight
at
after
this
this?
stuff. Yeah, I'll end up buried in the desert in about 2 weeks.
I don't know. That's a pretty good number. It's going to be, it's going
I'll
to
go below.
Okay.
I'll go below.
It's going to go.
I think so.
it's right on that number.
And if it ends up below, who does that benefit? Charlotte?
Charlotte. I
Charlotte.
think it benefits Charlotte.
No doubt.
Yeah. Okay, so there
I
you
think
go.
North Texas wants to get it kind of in a ruckus, right? I think they kind of want it to be kind of played,
Get a little
kind of
junky.
sloppy, and
Yeah.
let's get it up and down the floor a couple of times, and you know.